Hi, welcome back, you guys. I miss you, and I hope you had a nice spring break. Hopefully, you got a chance to actually take a bit of a break. So, welcome to our first online lecture. This week, we are going to be wrapping up our discussion on exchange and wealth in different types of societies. We started talking about this before face-to-face classes ended almost 3 weeks ago. So we'll pick back up with that, refresh ourselves a little, and move on to some new material. And then for the rest of the week, the next lecture I'll be posting, which should be up by tomorrow, Wednesday, we'll be starting a new topic, which is kinship and marriage. And so we'll start that with kinship this week and then get into marriage next week. Remember, all the readings for the different lecture topics are listed in the syllabus, so be sure you're checking that and staying up on that as well. And if you have any questions, definitely get in touch with me. Email me, set up an appointment, and we can talk via Zoom, all that good stuff. Make sure you've read the new syllabus as well. Okay, so exchange. How do different societies exchange goods and services? In the slide, that's downtown Hong Kong. That ship there is a shopping mall. And so to many of us, that's not really that odd. Markets, money, getting a good deal for what you're paying, exchange in this type of way is something that's normal and sort of natural to us. But from the perspective of anthropology, market exchange is actually relatively recent. It hasn't been around that long. People have organized exchange, wealth through other means for the majority of human existence. So remember our three basic forms of exchange anthropologists have identified that we sort of lump different societies into. Reciprocity is the first most long-standing form of exchange. This exists in all societies, including small-scale ones like the Kung and large-scale ones like the US. Second is redistribution. And we'll talk more about redistribution today. Before we left for the break, we spoke mostly about reciprocity. So we'll recap some of that and then move on to redistribution. This has not been around as long. It requires a certain type of social organization for it to occur, namely some sort of centralized authority that has the power to collect and reallocate goods on behalf of the society. That's redistribution. And then third, market exchange. Market exchange has really only been around in its fully fledged form, global market exchange, for a few hundred years. Anatomically, modern Homo sapiens have been around 100,000 years and really weren't that different from their ancestors 2 million years ago. And so for the majority of human existence, the past several 100,000 to millions of years, exchange, how people acquire goods, produce goods, what's money, what's wealth, this has been organized around principles other than market exchange. And so exchange exists in all economies, but not all types of societies, whether large or small scale, farming, hunter-gathering, or industrial societies like our own, practice all three types of exchange. And keep in mind also the type of exchange that you engage in is also a reflection of the social distance, your relationship with the person you're participating in the exchange with. So first, reciprocity, and this is review. Reciprocity is when individuals or groups pass objects back and forth. They do this for several different reasons. One is to help someone that's in need. So the Kung are a great example of reciprocity. Their society is dominated by what we call generalized reciprocity. Hunter comes back successful from the hunt that day and shares the meat with everyone else in the village, knowing that when that hunter comes back empty-handed, other village members will share with him. So reciprocity is practiced to help make sure everyone's needs are met. Also practiced to create, maintain, or strengthen social ties. And we'll talk more about this in just a minute, but exchange, either initiating it, reciprocating, participating in it. This is a main way to actually initiate social relationships, reinforce them, or even change the nature of them for better or for worse. People also practice reciprocity to obtain objects for themselves that they couldn't otherwise get. So maybe marine resources are available in one environment, but not another. People might practice reciprocity, this generalized sharing of resources from different areas. Reciprocity occurs in all types of human societies, again, including small-scale ones like the Kung or the Inuk Eskimos, and large-scale societies like the US. Think birthday gifts. Think your parents helping you with money or other things. These are all forms of reciprocity. And again, the type of reciprocity that's practiced, there's three types: generalized, balanced, and also negative. This is a reflection of the social relationship, the social distance between the people practicing it. So the interesting thing about exchange is it seems sort of simple enough. Can I buy you dinner? Would you like a free drink? But it's not quite this simple. Exchange is deeply tied up with the basics of humans as social creatures. So, for example, last class, 3 weeks ago, I asked you, you're out and someone offers to buy you a drink. You're out getting, say, a coffee, maybe not a beer. Someone offers to buy you a drink. What do you say? You say yes or no, and why? Why is that your answer? And so some of us, we might say no. Is that because you don't want a free drink or coffee or beer? Most of us like free stuff, right? Not necessarily. It's because typically you don't want to either have a conversation with that person, you don't want to owe them a drink back, you don't want to get to know the person. The denial of the drink, no thank you, it's not a denial of the object, the free drink, the thing. It's a refusal of the giver, the person offering to buy you that drink. It's not because you don't want a free beer or coffee. It's because you don't want a relationship potentially with this person. You don't necessarily want to get to know them. The reverse side, maybe someone offers to buy you a drink. You're interested in perhaps getting to know this person. You might accept, right? Again, it's not really accepting the free drink. That's a cool bonus, but it's also an accepting of that invitation to maybe have a chat, to maybe get to know someone. Maybe that leads somewhere, friends or some other type of relationship. So the object, the thing, the gift, which takes this form of unsolicited generosity, is never free. A gift is never free. There's always an expectation of a return. There's also social obligations tied up with that exchange. Sometimes students say, well, I won't say no. If someone asks to buy me a drink several times, I might eventually say yes, even though I don't really want to talk to the person. And this still holds, it still reflects the rules that we all follow, oftentimes subconsciously. The reason often we don't want to say no is, again, not because we don't want the free beer. We don't want to hurt the person's feelings, because again, it's not a denial of the object, it's more a denial of the giver. And we do this all the time. The wave, holding a door open, offering to pick up the tab. We initiate exchange, sometimes out of generosity, right, paying it forward, but it's also a way to find out if this person wants to maybe start a relationship. It doesn't have to be sexual or intimate, it could be friends, it could be whatever. And so instead of having to ask someone, would you like to date me, or would you like to talk to me and maybe I can get your phone number later? May I buy you a drink? And we don't have to put ourselves out there explicitly, but we can still achieve the same goal. We can still figure out if this person, or ask if this person would like to maybe get to know us, right? So we do this all the time, even if we don't talk about it sort of abstractly like I am right now. There's always an expectation of a return. There's always strings attached. The gift is never actually free. No such thing as a free drink, right? Always other strings attached. And so, as I said, there's three types of reciprocity. So just to be clear, there are three types of exchange: reciprocity, which we've been talking about, and redistribution and market exchange, both of which we'll get into here shortly. And so within just reciprocity, there are three types of reciprocity. These are generalized, balanced, and negative. Generalized reciprocity. It's not a direct exchange. Objects, things, gifts can be sort of given to someone and not necessarily returned. They can circulate, be used for a while, maybe given to someone else. At some distant time in the future, days, weeks, years, the favor is usually returned. It doesn't have to be of a direct equivalence. And this type of exchange, this sort of generalized sharing and exchange of objects and goods where no immediate or exact return is expected, this is generalized reciprocity, and it usually occurs between people that are socially close, close kin, family members, maybe close friends. It's not something you would practice with strangers or people that you don't really know. It involves a moderate amount of trust and a minimum of amount of social distance. It's people that you're close with, right? Because you know at some point they will sort of help you out, or that favor is going to be returned because you're really close with this person. The parent-child relationship in the U.S. is a great example of generalized reciprocity. Your parents provide food, shelter, maybe cars or gas money, even college educations for you, depending. And they don't usually come back when you're in your mid-20s and say, you know, you owe me about $576,000, right? It's not exact or balanced like that. It's more generalized. You share resources, circulate. They usually come back one way or another. It doesn't have to be equivalent, right? When your mom gets you a new phone or a TV for Christmas, or your dad or your grandma or whoever, or your significant other, and you made them, you know, a beautiful, I'm sure, macaroni necklace, right? And they don't come back and say, hey, you know, you owe me the $98 difference on the gift I got you versus what you got me. It's not like that. It's more generalized. Okay, so that's people that you're close with. Our next type of reciprocity, balanced. This is a more balanced, equivalent type of exchange. That's how you can think of it. The exchange is neutral, so that whatever's given is pretty much reciprocated, returned. And it's of equal value, and the exchange is usually immediate. The favor or the gift is returned, or at some agreed upon time in the future, that gift will be repaid. Gift exchange typically falls into this category, right? Think about that friend or cousin or maybe even sibling that, maybe not siblings, not the best example, but someone you keep giving gifts to, you continually give rides to, you continually do favors for, you're always there when they need to cry and talk about their latest relationship, which happens every 2 weeks, but they're never there to give you a ride, never pick up the phone when you need something, never really offer to return the favor. Eventually, these type of mooches, if you will, might find it difficult to continue to receive favors because they never reciprocate. The exchange isn't balanced, and that harms the social relationship. That can actually erode away the trust and the social bond, right? Think about that person that continually takes and takes and takes, never gives back. Eventually, you might stop supplying that person. You might stop picking up the phone because the exchange is no longer balanced. The relationship is being harmed. Just a non-Western example of balanced exchange, balanced reciprocity. I gave you an example before classes, face-to-face classes ended, of the wasi among Trobriand islanders. So in the Trobriand Islands, you have villages on the coast with easy access to fish and marine resources, and then villages in the interior of the islands that don't have easy access to marine resources, but have really good garden land. They grow root crops and taro and whatnot in them. So the coastal villages and the inland villages have a practice, an exchange practice, it's balanced reciprocity, called the wasi, where the coastal villages trade fish and seafood, give it to the interior reciprocates by providing garden crops. In this way, the different groups get objects that they need, food stuffs that they otherwise could not get in their environment, and it also forms a relationship, a bond between the two villages. They have this reliable exchange pattern where every few times a year or whatever, they trade resources. And it also creates somewhat of an alliance, right? They now know this village. They might be able to call upon them for in times of need, say a disaster strikes the coast. So it creates the exchange not only provides goods that people need, but it also creates a relationship, a bond between the two parties exchanging. It has to be balanced. If it's not balanced, if one party starts to try to get something out of the deal that's not fair, that usually erodes away the bond, the relationship, and eventually the exchange that's based on it. This brings us to the third type of reciprocity, negative. So this essentially, think bartering, haggling. You're trying to get something for nothing. You're trying to get more out of the deal than you're giving. Here, give me your cow and I'll give you this scrawny little chicken. It's negative because there's a cost involved. One party in the exchange is harmed. They're not getting the good end of the deal. They're getting the shitty end of the deal, if you will. And the exchange harms the receiver, the person getting the short end of the deal. Warfare also is an example of negative reciprocity. People are trying to get resources, women, land, whatever it might be, for less than they're giving up, right? They're trying to take it, if you will. Negative reciprocity is something you wouldn't practice with people you know. So generalize, that's for close kin, close friends maybe, people that you're close with emotionally. Balanced reciprocity, that's for people you know, friends, coworkers, neighbors perhaps. There's a moderate amount of trust and they're not extreme. There's some social closeness there too. There's a relationship. That's why balanced reciprocity works, because you know the person. That's why you don't typically practice it with someone you don't know, because there's no trust in the expectation that the favor will be returned. Negative, this is something that's practiced with people you don't know. You wouldn't want to practice negative reciprocity with a family member or a friend, because you'd be harming and eroding away that relationship and bond that you have with that person. So again, the mooch, the friend that always lets you pick up the tab, always lets you pay for dinner, always takes the ride, never, ever, ever offers to return the favor, eventually you might stop providing favors for this person because the exchange is not balanced. It's negative. That person is not reciprocating. It harms the relationship. Negative. So typically negative reciprocity is practiced between strangers, people that don't know each other, right? That aren't going to see each other again, because again, that negative reciprocity, future interaction is based off that exchange. So that would have negative implications for the future. Okay, so that's a little bit of a recap on reciprocity, how it's tied up with social distance and relationships. And one of the key takeaways is that exchange, for the majority of human existence, and even today, so much of it is tied up with the objects, the stuff being exchanged, but also the subjects, the people involved in the exchange, whether that's through forming relationships, helping others in need, or whatever it may be. It's about the objects, but exchange is so much also about the subjects, the people involved. This is true also in redistribution, which we'll talk about next. When we get to market exchange, this changes, right? So if you change one thing in the culture, this has implications for other aspects of the culture. In market exchange, people, the subjects, are largely left out of the equation, and this has consequences. We'll get there when we get there. Okay, so our second type of exchange that we'll discuss is redistribution. Redistribution is when members of an organized group contribute products, goods, or money to a common pool that is then redistributed to the group by some sort of centralized authority, leader or whatever that might be, and it's redistributed according to some normative or legal principle. So basically, there's someone in the society that has the authority to collect goods from everyone else and then reallocate them based off how they see fit. Or societal norms. This might be legally required. Taxes in the US are a good example of a legally enforced form of redistribution. We, as members in the US, citizens of the US, we contribute money, taxes to the federal government, and then those funds are used for various purposes to at least allegedly benefit the society. That's the main form of redistribution in the US and many other industrial large-scale societies. Another form of redistribution, tribute, something you see in pre-industrial complex societies. Think like the ancient Aztecs, ancient Mayas, ancient Egyptians, all these settled agricultural pre-industrial societies. So tribute, remember, in agricultural complex farming societies, you only have a proportion of the population actually growing food. Other people are specialized, involved in other types of occupations. And so tribute is a way to feed the rest of the population, those people that don't themselves produce food. Everyone in the society contributes crops, or goods. Maybe they're potters, maybe they grow corn. They contribute crops and goods to a centralized authority, maybe the ruler or the chief, and then those goods are redistributed back out to the society so that those people that don't farm themselves have food to eat and everyone gets the goods that they need. Sorry, my phone just rang. Okay, so that's legal, and then also redistribution occurs according to normative principles, meaning participating in it is a cultural norm, and if you don't participate, you're stigmatized. So like legally in the US, if you don't pay taxes, you can get fined, you get in trouble with the government, you can even face jail time. Normative meaning you're not going to be arrested by the police. But the culture, it's expected for you to participate, and so you're stigmatized. There's consequences that come with not participating. We'll look at a famous example of pre-industrial redistribution, so redistribution in non-Western societies, called the potlatch, here in just a few slides. Redistribution occurs only in some societies. It requires a certain type of social organization be in place, namely some sort of third party, some sort of centralized leader or authority that carries the power to organize this collection of goods and also the power to reallocate it back on behalf of the group. They're empowered to make decisions on behalf of the group. And so for redistribution to occur, there has to be a certain type of political social structure in place first, this centralized authority. And so this is one of the main ways that redistribution differs from reciprocity. It involves a third party, again, a centralized authority empowered to make decisions on behalf of the group to allegedly at least benefit the group. So first we'll look at an example of redistribution in modern industrial societies like our own, the US and taxes. So in the US, we all pay money, pay taxes to the federal government, which are then redistributed for two main reasons, at least in theory. First, taxes are redistributed out to benefit the country as a whole. So with tax money, we fund police, law enforcement, we fund national defense, we fund infrastructure, things like roads, bridges, airports, so that we can all travel around. So money is used to provide goods that all of us benefit from. And then secondly, the money is, again, in theory, used to provide assistance for individuals and groups that are in need, that are vulnerable. So for example, Social Security, as we work, we pay into the Social Security program of the federal government. When people in our society get older and can no longer work and provide for themselves, they get a check from Social Security. So we've all been paying into it so that we can support elder members of the society once they're no longer working. Medicaid or Medicare, same idea. The money can go to older people that are no longer working, no longer have employer health insurance, or younger people of all types that simply don't have access to healthcare. They don't have money or the resources to get it. And so we'll fund Medicare so that people can get healthcare, can get basic needs taken care of. And keeping in mind, we live in the wealthiest country in the world, and we have one of the worst healthcare systems in the world. We spend more on healthcare than any other industrialized nation, yet we have some of the sickest people in the world. For another day. And so the way the money is spent, the expenditure, the way it's spent and what it's spent on, this is based on moral norms and also cultural values. Again, that's in theory, depending on who we elect. Sometimes politicians choose to use the money for their own individual benefit rather than advancing the interests of society. And that's why it's so important to vote, right? Vote for people that share your values, because these are the people that decide where the money goes. So the other side to redistribution, which I'm sort of already alluded to, is it might be used for the public good. It's also a major basis for political disagreement in this country. What the money should be spent on, for who, how much, what's fair. And again, people have different ideas about how the money should be spent based off their education, what they know, what they've been exposed to, what position in life they hold, which informs their understanding, right? And so there's a lot of disagreement about how the money should be spent, what's right, what's fair, and also the money sometimes gets used not for us, not for the people in the society, but rather individual politicians might use it to further their own election campaign or garner support and money for their own purposes rather than actually helping the people they were elected to help. So first, conflict and political disagreement. Redistribution, taxes, where the money should go, is a never-ending debate in industrial societies. Who should pay taxes? How much should they pay? Who should receive benefits? And how much? One example, one of the wealthiest person in the world, the owner of the CEO of Amazon, Jeff Bezos, do you know how much they paid in taxes last year? Nothing. Not one penny. One of the reasons for that is laws, government policies that create that give tax breaks to the ultra wealthy. One side of the political spectrum, namely the right, tends to support that, while the left in general doesn't, but it's not always quite that neat, right? There's crossover between the aisles. So how should the money be spent and for what purposes? Should it be for tax breaks for the ultra wealthy so that they can invest in business and that will all trickle down, which is the argument that we get that it'll trickle down and help the rest of us? Or should we use that money on college education, loan forgiveness, healthcare, proper nutrition, right? How should we use the money and for what? So the current political battle in the US has a lot to do with redistribution. Let's talk about just healthcare for a minute. And really so the battle over healthcare is we have Obamacare right now, which is a step towards nationalized healthcare. The system is structured to correct for how things were prior to this. So when Obama was elected, his plan extended healthcare access to other people. That's the idea. It's got problems, but the idea is there's a lot of people that don't have healthcare. People are dying. We live in one of the wealthiest countries in the world, and there's really no excuse, right, for people not to have access to something so basic as healthcare. Sorry, that's my phone again. And so the Tea Party, if you're not familiar with them, they come in reaction. They were developed in reaction to the campaign and election of Barack Obama in 2018. The Tea Party is an ultra right-wing conservative group that is very much against Obamacare or any form of nationalized health care. Their argument is that this is socialism, the government using tax money to provide health care for its citizens. Just as a quick side note, for those of you, the word socialist and liberal gets thrown around quite a bit. So the Tea Party, they're conservative. Conservative means traditional values, not really open to changing values. So for example, not being open to extending the right to marry to all people, whether hetero or homosexual. That's conservative. So traditional values, not open to change. Liberal means open to change, open to changing values. So you can be a liberal Republican, you can be a conservative Democrat. They're not necessarily synonymous. So when I say conservative, that's what I mean. They also happen to be Republican and right-wing by and large. So they would say healthcare, Obamacare, that extend using government money to help provide healthcare to people that otherwise can't get it. This is dirty socialism. Another note on definitions, for those of you that don't know what socialism is. It's essentially a government system where money, tax money, public funds are used by the government to fund public services and goods, either economically or for different groups and individuals. So guess what? We already live in a socialist country. We live in a democratic socialist country. It's not the same as communism. We elect leaders and people that we vote for that share our values that then help decide the policies that dictate where the money goes, right? So socialism. And actually, we have a lot of socialism in our government right now with Donald Trump as president. Last year, we gave $2 trillion to the wealthiest 1% in corporations in the US. Your tax money going to a $2 trillion paycheck, essentially, to the 1%, wealthiest 1% in this country. So that's one example of redistribution according to specific political values, right? The ideology, the idea behind that is that all that money for the rich people, well, then they can create more businesses and create more jobs and hire the rest of us so that we can all make a living wage. And in the end, it'll trickle down and be good for all of us. The massive amount of inequality that's only increased in the last 40 years is I'd argue, a direct result of failed trickle-down economics. There's no empirical evidence to suggest it actually works. And in fact, it's derived trickle-down economics from something called horse and sparrow theory. So the idea is, in horse and sparrow theory, don't feed the sparrows, the poor people. Give all the oats to the horses. Give all the feed to the horses, all the seed to the horses. The horses will have more than they can ever eat. And in this way, they will shit out some of that seed and the birds will still eat. The sparrows will still eat. That's what trickle-down theory is. That's trickle-down economics. And so back to sort of Tea Party, they would argue that nationalized healthcare is socialism. Hopefully, I've just made the point that we already practice socialism, just not for the poor. We do it for the ultra wealthy, not the poor, not the people that actually need subsidized help or monetary assistance. So they would say, no, do away with it. Just to read from their website, no Obamacare. Obamacare must be destroyed with a vote of Congress. Dump it now. Wipe it off the books. Erase all traces of Obamacare. Obamacare is a blemish on our sterling heritage. Blot it out now. Drive a stake through the heart of Obamacare. The hideous abomination from hell must be eradicated. We must send a clear message to all future generations that we shall not stand for socialism of any kind unless it's $2 trillion in tax cuts for the ultra wealthy. Obama socialism is a political cancer which is terminal to our beloved nation. So these are the arguments that these folks make. The flip side, the other argument would say we need to extend healthcare, and one of the only ways to do this might be to nationalize it, to get the federal government involved. Prior to this, all healthcare was privatized, which means companies don't necessarily have to give a shit about providing healthcare for everyone. They just have to make money. They can insure simply the wealthiest people and make a ton of profits doing just that. What this does is it makes insurance, because it's all privatized, out of reach for people of lower income levels. Private companies also won't take people with pre-existing conditions. Most of us, especially if you're after 30 years old, have pre-existing conditions. And so those on the other side, tend to be on the left, would say, we need to address this. We need to restructure the way we offer healthcare so that everyone can have basic healthcare and people aren't dying for no reason. We live in one of the wealthiest countries in the world. This would be a good use of our money. Again, we spent $2 trillion just on a paycheck to the ultra wealthy. Can you imagine what we could have used in those funds for your education, for healthcare, for other things that we care about? So how the money is spent, what it gets used for, how much for who, is a never-ending debate in our country. We're seeing it right now, again, with the COVID virus. There's a big stimulus economic package of several, is it billion, if not trillion dollars coming out to help people that aren't working because we're in shelter-in-place orders. The reason it took so long to get out, to get passed, is because disagreement on the two sides of the aisles between Democrats and Republicans. The initial bill put forth by Republicans was essentially money for corporations and wealthy people, sort of a slush fund with a checkbook and no transparency about where the money goes. That got changed, right, through debate between the two sides. Now the bill actually has help, subsidies, money for workers, for all the rest of us, not just wealthy corporations. So it's a never-ending debate. The other side to redistribution, aside from the money being used to help us or not help us, is elected officials and office holders responsible for tax money, for redistributing it. Sometimes they use these public resources simply to further their own interests rather than to benefit the country or help those in greatest need. So instead of using the money for a project that actually will bring jobs or clean up the environment or provide proper nutrition for young children, they might bring a project in that doesn't really they might bring a project in, like say building a new road or a wetlands reclamation project, and it doesn't really do much for society, but what it does for that individual office holder is brings jobs to their constituents, which are going to be voting for them, brings money into the community. again, the people that are going to be voting for them. And so sometimes politicians will get projects and policies passed, not because it's actually helpful to society or the environment, but because it gets them votes or money and allows them to hang on to their political power. And so the type of reciprocity I'm talking about here, sometimes members of Congress will say, hey, I'll vote for your roads project in your community if you vote for my wetlands reclamation project in my community. Again, not really the best use of the money in some cases, but it gives money and thus power to the people doing it so that they can get reelected and perhaps even increase their power. This is a balanced reciprocity that Congress is practicing. You vote for my thing and I will vote for yours. And you can guarantee if someone didn't follow through on their end of the deal, then that person, it would be very difficult to get a favor the next time around because the exchange wouldn't have been balanced. Okay, so that's a bit about taxes, redistribution in the US, what it's supposed to be used for, and how it ends up getting used some of the time. But what about redistribution in non-Western societies that don't have markets or money? So there's a famous form of redistribution in a small-scale society known as the Kwakiutl. The Kwakiutl are a northwest coast group of North America, indigenous group, and they're hunter-gatherers and also fishers. They hunt caribou, also rabbits, but they also fish for salmon, stock whales, and also hunt sea otters and other marine mammals for food and furs. They also gather shellfish, seaweed, berries. So all sorts of different wild resources go into their diet. And another interesting thing about the Kwakiutl is they're different from typical hunter-gatherer groups that we've talked about, like the Kung or the Inuk in the North American, or the Inuk in northern North America. So they're different because they have much larger populations. They're more sedentary. They don't move around nearly as much. The village might stay in the same place for several decades. And they also have all the trappings of sort of complex civilization in terms of elaborate artwork, canoes. You can see some of the stuff pictured on the slide. This is also where totem poles come from. And so why do these hunter-gatherers, the Kwakiutl, not fit the mold of our typical hunter-gatherers? Remember, hunter-gatherers are typically nomadic and they have impermanent villages because they're always moving around to follow resources. This also keeps their population levels low, doesn't allow for them to have lots of possessions or elaborate artwork. And so the main difference for the Kwakiutl is they're hunter-gatherers, but they live on the coast. And so they have a more stable, permanent food supply in terms of marine resources, which has allowed the elaboration of their culture in terms of artwork and canoes and more possessions. And the reason we're talking about the Kwakiutl is they practice something called, and it's a famous form of redistribution, in which they practice the conspicuous consumption of or conspicuous destruction of wealth to assert status. And so the famous example is called the potlatch. What these different Northwest Coast groups do is, so conspicuous means lavish or wasteful. It's noticeable. So they practice this one of two ways. First, conspicuous consumption of wealth through exchange. And what they'll do is different chiefs of different villages will amass goods, totem poles, woven rugs, salmon oil, animal skins, food. And they will amass as many goods as they can and then hold a huge feast, kind of like a party, a potlatch, and they'll give out all the goods to different people, different tribes, different people within their tribe, and just lavish gifts on different people. And the chiefs that can have the biggest feasts, give away the most stuff, they earn the most status in the society. They become somewhat of a big man in the eyes of the rest of the community. And the way that this sort of works is that, look at me, I've collected all this stuff, food, goods, rugs, oils, all this stuff. I'm taking care of my family, me, my village, and I'm also helping all of you, and I'm still okay. I'm still looking good. I'm still walking tall. Look at me. right? And so it's this way to assert status through exchange, through giving away more than anyone could possibly really return. You gain sort of a sense of a loyalty among people. These people are then willing to help you when you need it. They're willing to provide goods for your large feast to give out when that time comes because you've helped them in the past. And so conspicuous consumption as a way to redistribute wealth so people get things they otherwise wouldn't, that they need. And it's also a way to assert and achieve higher status in the society, sort of this big man status. The other way, they also practice the conspicuous destruction of wealth. And so we'll see an example of this in just a minute. Different chiefs of competing villages, basically they hold a potlatch and each chief takes turn destroying stuff, destroying all the goods they've amassed by throwing them on this huge bonfire. And the chief that can burn, destroy the most stuff wins, has the most status. And it's the same idea as the feast. So look how much stuff I can give out, or look how much stuff I can destroy. Look at me, I'm taking care of my family, my people are taken care of, doing good, doing better than yours. My village is doing good, doing better than yours. I'm doing good, doing better than you. And I can still afford to destroy all this stuff and I'm still doing good. It's a way to assert and elevate one's status. We actually do it too, which we'll get to here in a few minutes. And so, and just one more note before we look at this example of the potlatch, the Solomon Islanders practice this too, not the potlatch, but they also built into their society exchange and specifically giving away more than other people can return in the one-talk system. It's a way to also gain status. So before the Solomon Island nation state via colonialism emerged, the Solomon Islanders practiced the one-talk system, which I've told you about. One-talk is your kin, your relatives, people you're close with, and you'll help your own one-talk in exchange before helping other more distantly related people. And so sort of pre-nation state times in Solomon Islands, you could become sort of a big man in the village by giving away more than people could return, by providing food, by providing help, and not asking for anything back. Remember, a gift's never really free, and you start to gain, you attain a sense of loyalty among these people who are then willing to help you either harvest your crops or fight your battles or whatever it is you need to do. So you can become sort of a big man, a chief in the village by helping people when they need help. Okay, so the quaquetal, the potlatch. This is an example, an opening proclamation of conspicuous consumption or destruction of wealth. I am a great chief who makes people ashamed. I am the great chief who makes people ashamed. I bring shame to your faces. I bring jealousy to your faces. I make people cover their faces by what I continually do in this world, giving again and again feasts to all the tribes. And so what I want you to do now is we're going to watch a quick clip. So go ahead and type in the URL for the YouTube video at the bottom of the slide. Type that into your browser. You can go ahead and pause this lecture video and then watch the clip. Again, the URL is on the browser. Type that in. It should pop right up. It's only 1 minute and 27 seconds, but it's actual live footage of an actual potlatch before it was sort of outlawed by the colonial government. So take a look at it so you can actually see what it looks like. It's kind of cool. It's actual footage going back a really long time ago. Because I can't embed the YouTube videos I want to show you into my own YouTube video that I'm making for you, until I find a better way, this is how we're going to watch clips. So go ahead and pause the YouTube lecture, type in the link into your browser, and watch the 1.5-minute long clip of the potlatch. Go ahead and close that out when you're done, and then come back and start the lecture again. Okay, so hopefully you had a chance to take a look at the example of the potlatch. Again, this conspicuous, notice, lavish, wasteful exchange of stuff. And in many ways, we have a lot of vestiges of the potlatch mentality around with us today. This idea of conspicuous consumption, noticeable consumption to assert status, and also waste. So conspicuous consumption and conspicuous waste still linger. We still sort of practice it. Different examples. It's more fun when we can talk about it in class and you guys can give me your own examples. But you can maybe relate to some of these or at least get an idea what I'm talking about. This idea of keeping up with the Joneses, right? Always sort of making sure that you have the right clothes or the right house or your lawn looks right or you have the nice car. Always sort of trying to keep up, always looking above and below, right? If I could just have this, I could be happier. If I could just have that. Christmas as another example. Trying to outdo each other, right? With bigger and bigger gifts each year or even in the same year. The arms race, the US arms race. Our military is a great example of conspicuous consumption, or rather conspicuous waste. We spend over 50% of the national budget, your tax dollars, hundreds of billions of dollars on the military every year to build weapons that are redundant, that we will never use, a jet for this and a radar for that, stuff that will never ever get used, that we will come up with new technology before we even use some of this stuff. So it's not for its use value. We're not actually going to use most of it. But what does that say? What does that assert to the rest of the world? This massive military might, the potential that it carries, right? It says, don't fuck with us, right? We are asserting military might status on an international stage. Not so much about the actual use value, but what that stuff says in our culture, in our society. And it says, don't fuck with us. Right? So we practice this too. We actually live in what is called a consumer culture today here in the US. And this is a relatively new thing. Consumption, high levels of consumption is not a natural human condition. And from a long-term anthropological perspective, it's a really recent trend, actually. The culture of consumption, consumer culture, this rise in it, is inextricably linked to the rise in market-dominated societies. So remember, there's three types of exchange that characterize human existence: reciprocity, redistribution, and market exchange. Markets are a relatively new form of exchange, only been around a couple hundred years, not even a dot on the page. And consumer culture is also relatively new. Again, it doesn't characterize humans naturally. It's a cultural condition. People created it. The other types of exchange that have characterized the majority of human existence are reciprocity and redistribution. And so with both reciprocity and redistribution, it's not about encouraging ever-increasing consumption or accruing profits or making money. It's about the stuff. Yeah, the objects are part of reciprocity and redistribution, whether that's tax money or food or whatever's being exchanged. But it's also about the subjects, the people involved. Right? In reciprocity, it's about sharing with those in need, helping your close kin, creating, maintaining, reinforcing social relationships. Or in the case of redistribution, it's about sustaining the society as a whole, right? By supporting those that don't grow food themselves with food, but also providing other services to the society as a whole. So for the majority of human existence, exchange has been tied up with the objects, the stuff being exchanged, but also the subjects, the people involved in the exchange, are a very important part of the equation. In market economies, exchange has very little to do with the social relationships or anything beyond the object and its value or the price you can get for it in the market of exchange. And this also shapes our social relationships in certain ways. People in market exchange become kind of an impersonable variable, right? The focus isn't on who made the stuff. Maybe you know the country it was made in. How many of you right now know who made the shirt you're wearing or the food that you ate or are gonna eat, right? Like really know the person that actually made of it. Most of us don't. Production and consumption is detached in market economies. We usually will never know the people making our stuff. Likewise, they'll never meet the people consuming the stuff they're making. And this matters Again, people become an impersonal variable. They're not noticed. They're left out of the equation. The focus is on the price, the profit. These are the main incentives driving market exchange: money. While people as an incentive in market exchange are largely left out of the equation. And so what I mean, let me draw a parallel for you that will hopefully explain what I mean. Market exchange is similar to negative reciprocity in a sense. They're not the same. When we talk about negative reciprocity, we're not really talking about market exchange. But there's a parallel. So in negative reciprocity, recall there's a cost involved in that exchange. There's a harm done. One party in the exchange is getting a better deal, and someone's getting the short end of the stick, and that's a cost. The cost falls on the receiver, the person getting the short end of the stick. They're not getting a good deal. They're being harmed. There's a cost. Okay, negative reciprocity. In market exchange, there's also a cost. There's also harm done, but the cost, the harm, doesn't fall on the two parties involved in the exchange. It doesn't fall on the consumer or the producer. The producer makes stuff, makes a profit, sells it, they're good. The consumer is able to buy goods at a cheap price, they're good. The cost, the hurt, these costs are externalized. They are deferred onto other people in the world and other places around the world. So the reason all this cheap stuff is possible is because of the way our market systems and our global economy is set up. Companies are able to get stuff made for way below the cost of production, meaning they don't pay fair wages. They'll pay really low wages. This is one reason why many companies export their labor overseas, because there's no labor laws over there. So they can go work, set up factories in Indonesia or China or wherever it is and pay the workers almost nothing. This is how one of the ways they're able to sell their products, their consumables, so cheap to us. They also don't pay for healthcare, worker safety, or follow a bunch of other laws, because in a lot of the places they move their factories to, there are no laws. That's why they move their factories there. There's also all these environmental costs, right? The pollution from all the resource use and the toxins and all the other stuff we use to make our cheap crap. And these toxins, these pollutants, they have to go somewhere into our air, our water, our soil, our food. And so there is a cost. The only way this cheap stuff is made is because we don't actually pay the full cost of production. We make it through exploiting labor in other populations and exploiting other people's environments by trashing them. So the producer gets a good deal, they make money. The consumer gets a good deal, they get cheap products. The costs are deferred, are externalized onto other people and other places. And we often don't see this, right? We often see the benefit of the market economies. We get cool, cheap stuff, right? We can order stuff on Amazon in a day, but we don't see the costs, the harm that's done to all these other people and places along the way. And that's not an accident. Much of that is hidden from us on purpose, because if we knew about it, we might want to make different choices. We might not buy those products, right? And so actually the reason for, just as a side note, one of the main arguments for why we need government regulation of businesses is to prevent some of these excesses, these abuses and costs. Require companies to pay their workers a fair wage, require them to help with healthcare, require them to clean up their pollution and the other toxic crap that they emit into the environment. Start pricing some of this stuff into the cost of production, make companies actually pay for that, and they'll either pass that price, that increased cost, onto the consumer, and the consumer will either not buy it because they don't want to pay the increased price, or they'll pay for it because they do want to pay for all those costs, right? The pollution, the social harms being done. They'll actually pay that increased price to offset some of that stuff. So the idea is you change the incentives, you start pricing some of these costs into the stuff we buy, people will start making different choices. We're not really paying the true cost of the stuff that we make, buy, and sell. And again, these people involved, they're largely invisible to us, right? All we see is the cheap stuff on our shelves. So increasing consumption rates is actually seen now by many, especially social scientists, as a major contributing factor to human impact on the environment. And until recently, and still today, many concerns about human impact on the environment, about sustainability, have focused primarily on population rather than consumption. So this idea that we have a population problem, we have too many people and not enough resources, and there's only so much carrying capacity on the earth to provide for us and absorb all the pollution that we emit back out, and eventually we're going to run out. That's the argument, right? This argument is not what I'm saying. This is the argument. It goes back to a guy named Thomas Malthus, a demographer that wrote an essay over 200 years ago on population, saying that this is what will happen. Humans reproduce, human population grows exponentially, resources do not, and eventually human population is going to outstrip available resources, resulting in environmental degradation and all sorts of other problems. And so this type of thinking is still mainstream today, and it's extremely problematic. For one, the US is roughly 5% of the global population, yet we consume over a third of the global resources and produce over a third of global pollution. And so population problem, or is it a small proportion of the population using most of the resources, producing most of the waste, right? And so many social scientists would argue we don't have a population problem, we have a consumption problem, right? Actually, we do have enough on the earth to provide for everyone today. There's enough food produced today to provide 3,500 calories per person per day. The problem is people don't have access. We do not have a population problem. We have a distribution and a consumption problem. Some people don't have access, and people with access consume far more than their fair share. And one of the reasons this type of thinking, this focus on population, is so problematic is because if you frame the problem, environmental problems, human impact on the environment, in terms of too many people, a population problem, this Malthusian thinking, then that is going to shape the solutions that you come up with. Right? And so if our problem is too many people, the solution lies in limiting population growth. And one of the results of that, and you can look this up, is the US in the past has taken your tax dollars, your money, and sent aid money over to places like India to pay for sterilization of poor women, right? To deal with human impact on the environment and the population problem. If you frame the problem in terms of population, the solutions will also focus on that. What I'm arguing is population is not the problem, right? Consumption is far more important. Again, 5%, US is 5% of the global population. We consume a third of the resources, produce a third of the waste. And if you look at the data, trends now indicate consumption is just as important as overall population, if not more important. And what you're seeing on the graph from the Food and Agricultural Organization of the UN is growth in global population and also growth in food consumption. So that bottom thick line, the darkest, thickest one, that's world population growth. This is 1965 to 95. And each line above is consumption of food products, from the highest to the lowest, starting with, looks like seafood, world meat consumption, and then world milk consumption. And so in all cases, food consumption is outstripping population growth. Population problem or a consumption problem. And note that all these foods are animal products, dairy or meat, which is far more consumptive than just, say, plant products. About 90% of the energy, the food, water, whatever goes into feeding, caring for, and raising animals, 90% of that energy is lost. Just through trophic levels, just through energy conversion. Only about 10% of that energy consumed throughout that animal's life is actually converted into edible products for humans. So it's really, really consumptive. Same idea here. It shows population growth and global population growth, and then also use of forestry product consumption globally. And same idea, world population is that dark boldest line there on the bottom, and in almost every case, forest resource use is outstripping population growth, with the exception of a couple of different forest products. And so increased levels of consumption are related to the rise of consumer culture, meaning that our society, our system, our economy, especially marketing and advertising, are structured to keep us consuming. The reason why there's an economic crisis as a result of the public health crisis from COVID right now is because people aren't working, people aren't allowed to go out. And so people aren't spending money, they're not shopping, they're not consuming. And it literally shuts the economy down. It also stops the profit margins of large companies from going up. And so in order to keep the economy going, and especially the profit margins rising of the biggest corporations, people need to keep consuming. And so even if you should come close to feeling satisfied with your material goods, a commercial, advertising, marketing will pop in there to remind you you could be happier if you just had the right stuff. This is sort of what consumer culture is all about. And they spend billions on advertising to sort of press our psychological buttons and trick us into consuming stuff that we may not really need, that we may not even really want. So consumer culture is when the purchase, the ownership, and the use of commodities, of stuff, the objects that you're buying, and what these commodities signify becomes the center of social life, right? What kind of phone do you have? What kind of car are you driving? What do your clothes look like? What type of house do they live in? What do you do for a living, which signifies maybe how much money you make? Look at the picture, really ostentatious big bag. I obviously shop somewhere really expensive. Bet you wish you could afford this stuff. And even if you're not on this bandwagon, so many people in this country are. And I think all of us, at least to an extent, whether it's your phone or your clothes or you're dressing against the style in your own style, we all sort of fall into this a little bit. Always sort of looking around, right? Above and below and measuring. Also in consumer culture, our actual needs become merged and conflated with our wants and our desires. So do you need water? Do you need food? Yeah. Sex? Yeah. Air? Yeah. Do you need a new phone? Do you need a beer? Do you maybe? Right? But we start to conflate these, right? I need my Netflix subscription. Da da da. Excuse me. And also in consumer culture, the tangible object of consumption, the thing that you're buying, becomes the actual use value of the thing, becomes less important than its culturally coded meaning. And so what do I mean by this? Think about it for a second. The object, the use value, what you need it for, is actually less important, less of a reason of why you bought that particular consumable. It's not so much the use value, it's the culturally coded meaning. So like, for example, when I walk into our classroom, or you should see what I'm wearing right now, I try to dress professionally to an extent. You guys can judge that however you want and make your own comments to yourself. But, you know, I wear heels or something. I don't wear a beanie or a bathing suit. What if I walked in there day one in a muumuu? A muumuu, if you guys don't know what a muumuu is, Homer Simpson wears muumuus. It's like a big giant house dress. Take a sheet and sort of staple it on your body. That's what a muumuu looks like. And I guarantee, no matter what you think you would say to my face, inside your head, if I walked in there with that, you would be thinking all sorts of stuff. Because it's not about the object. A muumuu covers me just as much as the other clothes I wear, right? The actual use value is the same. It's the culturally coded meaning attached to that object that matters more. Right? What does me wearing a muumuu say, right? Maybe I'm lazy, maybe I shouldn't really be there, maybe I did it to trick you, right? But you would definitely be cocking your head if I walked in there like that. It's not so much about the use value, the actual thing. Clothes cover, that's what they do. It's the symbolic, the culturally coded meaning it carries. Purses are another good example. I could walk into school with a plastic Bonds bag. Why don't I just keep my shit in there? It'd be cheaper, it'd be easy, might be a little louder, but whatever. Because again, that sends a message, right? It signals to people something that I maybe don't want to signal to them. Even if it's not true, it still says something. People will still perceive it in certain ways. So a Bonds bag, an old sewed up rag, that could carry my shit in it, but I don't carry my stuff in that when I come to class, right? I put it in my school bag. iPhones, or whatever type of phone you have. How many of you have bought a new phone before you actually needed one? And I mean really needed one, like your other one didn't work, right? And so consumer culture, marketing, advertising, companies can keep us consuming by releasing the latest product, even though when they release new updates and new products, they already had that stuff ready a year or two ago. They just don't release it all at once because they want you to buy new stuff each time they update it or come out with a new feature. They don't release it all at once because then you'd only have to buy it that one time. They want you to have to buy it 5 times. all sorts of things. There's also something called built-in obsolescence. And we're going to watch a film clip in a minute that talks about this. And companies will actually spend billions in research to figure out how quickly they can make a product break, but not so quick that you won't buy another one. Because they want you to keep buying it, so if it works forever, you'll only have to buy it once. They figure out how to make it break, so you have to buy another one, but they don't want to make it break too quickly so that you might switch products or something. So they actually research this threshold point for planned obsolescence, when to actually make the product break, so you have to buy another one. There's also something called perceived obsolescence, and this is sort of related to fashion trends or fast fashion. There's no sort of biological or health reason for clothing styles. Let's keep it simple. And so why do fashion styles change, right? It has to do with what's cool in that society, or what that item carries in terms of status, or what it says about you in terms of identity, right? The tangible object of consumption becomes less important than its culturally coded meaning. And as long as what society sees as interesting or cool or sexy or hip or in style keeps changing, people will continually buying new stuff. Consumerism defines not just us, but also our economy. So a lot of stuff we value for practical use. Food nourishes us. Housing, it provides shelter. Clothes cover us. But a great many material products are also valued symbolically. And the symbolic value of an object is determined by one's culture. So food choices might express identity. Are you vegan? Or if you don't eat pork, maybe Judaism, or organic or keto. Houses demonstrate wealth. Motor vehicles, cars demonstrate status. Clothes flatter. And like most other consumables, send social messages about who we are. But a lot of objects are bought and sold entirely for their symbolic value, like jewelry, cosmetics, haircuts. So in other words, we buy stuff, we dress certain ways, we drive certain cars, we have the latest phone because it signals to other people who we are, what we're about, our identity. And again, consumerism defines not just us, but also our economy. A huge percentage of the U.S. workforce is involved in the production of consumer goods and services. And that's why so many people can't work right now, right? We don't really make stuff. We work in consumer goods, services. And the engine of economic growth in the capitalist system is consumption. Again, the system's designed through marketing and advertising to keep us consuming. When you hear politicians talking about tax cuts for people or for the wealthy, it's so people have more money to buy stuff, to go shopping, to keep the economy going. One other thing I want to say about consumer culture, to try to sort of dive into how this works and why we're largely not really conscious of it. So should you become close to satisfying all the things you want? Again, billions is spent on marketing and advertising to press our psychological buttons and convince us that we just need one more thing or this or that. And they trick us into continuing to consume. And so a couple of examples to illustrate what I mean. One is this concept of infinite, unlimited choices is a problem for our psychology. And so I'll give you an example to illustrate what I mean, but think buyer's remorse. Oh, I got this at the restaurant, but I could have had that. Or you get a new shirt, but then that kind of might fade after a day or two, and I could have had that, right? We're always you're always picking something, but there's so many choices, so many options that you're also simultaneously, when you choose, you're also denying yourself. I could have had that, could have had this. Okay, so this guy, Daniel Gilbert, sociologist that studies the relationship between consumption, money, wealth, stuff, and happiness. And he talks about this study. It gets at this psychological trick of unlimited choice. So there's two groups of people, we'll say group A and group B. And both groups come in and they're asked to look at 5 different paintings and then rate the paintings on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being best, 5 being, they liked that the least. And they were told they were doing this for whatever reason. That's not really what the study was about. And so they rated the paintings 1 through 5, favorite to least favorite. Now, at the end of that, the researcher told group A as a reward, as a thank you, we're going to let you take home one of the paintings. And they give them a choice between maybe the top 2 or 3 paintings the person liked. You say, go ahead and pick one. And same thing for the second group, Group B, except they didn't give them a choice. They said, we're going to give you a painting as a thank you, and they just gave maybe the second highest favorite, the one that the person liked, they gave them that one, but no choice, okay? So Group A got to pick theirs that they took home. Group B was just given a painting to take home. And then both the day after and a few days later and 7 days later, they asked the groups, they measured their contentment, their happiness with the paintings. And so Group A, some of them after a day already were sort of regretting their choice, weren't happy with it, wished they'd maybe pick something else. And by a week later, almost everyone in Group A was dissatisfied with the painting they'd chosen, not happy, even though a week before they had had no painting. Group B, the one that had no choice, a day later, they were all happy still, and a week later, everyone was still happy with the painting that was given to them, that they didn't choose, but they liked it, and it was just given to them. And so it's, again, this unlimited choice, could have had this, could have had that. It's a psychological trick, and it keeps us consuming because the idea is consumption equals happiness. And so second example, to tie this together, some stuff does result in well-being and happiness. So there's a film called I Am. It's a great documentary made by Tom Shadyac, the guy that produced Ace Ventura: Pet Detective. So Tom Shadyac gets really rich, and he's living the good life in a big mansion. He gets really depressed. He gets in a bad accident. He's stuck in the hospital for half a year, and he thinks about killing himself because he's not doing well. And he's super rich at this point and living the good life, and he realizes he's not really any happier. So he investigates this relationship between happiness and stuff, and that's what the film I Am, again, it's really good, is about. And so there's an example in I Am that I'll elaborate on. And the guy says about consumption, there's a truth and a lie. Here's the truth about stuff, consumption, and happiness. You're out in the woods, you're lost, it's cold and snowing, and you have no fucking clue how you're going to get out of this situation. It's also starting to get dark, you don't have any food, water, you don't have a light, you don't have a fire. You're starting to realize you're in pretty big trouble. All of a sudden, you happen to stumble upon a little cabin, and the light is on, people are in there, they even invite you in, maybe give you a little bit of tea, maybe even a little bit of hot soup. There's a fire in there, you're no longer lost, you're no longer possibly going to die. And all of a sudden, a little bit of stuff, a little bit of warmth, a little bit of company, maybe a little bit of tea or soup. This person is a whole lot happier. A little bit of stuff has made them much happier. Not very debatable. That's the truth. The lie is that much more stuff will make you that much happier, right? And there's diminishing returns on that. But so we get sort of stuck without maybe critically thinking about why we're consuming, why we're getting stuff. And one of the underlying reasons is I think there's this idea that, will lead to well-being or happiness. If you look at the data, that's actually not true. And a lot of times we'll give up the things that actually make us happy, relationships and experiences, to make more money, to buy more stuff. So interesting. Food for thought. What we're going to do now to wrap up our discussion on exchange, and this will do it for this topic, is you're going to watch a short film. It's only 20 minutes, and you're going to do this the same way you watched the potlatch clip. You're going to type this link in for the story of stuff, type that into your browser, look it up, watch it. It's about 20 minutes. It should pop right up for you. And so the story of stuff is about consumerism. It's about the market economy and increased consumption in the world, and especially it's relevant to countries like the US. And so we often realize a lot of the benefits. We get the cool, cheap stuff. We as people that work in the market, we can sell our labor to different employers. If we don't like our boss, we can quit, find a new job, at least theoretically. We can buy cheap stuff. We can find the best deal for our buck, shop around to find good prices. There's all these benefits to the global market economy. And we often realize the benefits, but we often don't realize the disadvantages and the costs that go along with producing all that cheap stuff. These externalities, these externalized social and environmental costs I was talking about earlier, the harm that's done in the exchange, that doesn't fall on the producer who's making a profit. It doesn't fall on the consumer who's getting a good deal. It falls on all these other people and places along the way that are involved in making all of our cheap stuff. And so go ahead, you're going to watch this clip. And while you're watching it, a couple of questions to keep in mind. What are externalities? You should take some notes. What are they? Jot down some examples even. And also, what is perceived obsolescence and planned obsolescence? These are two key strategies used by companies and marketers to keep us consuming, to keep us buying stuff, to keep those profit margins up. And again, one of the arguments is that if you start pricing in these costs, these externalities, things not included in the price tag, people might make different choices. They either won't want to pay the true cost of the production, and so they won't buy that stuff. That'll put the person out of business, or they'll buy other products. So the idea is actually start pricing in what it really costs, and change will come from that. People will either buy different products because they don't want to support sort of the social or environmental abuses of this company, or they won't buy the products at all, right? Because they're now actually reflective of what it really costs, and they find maybe they don't need them as much as they thought. We got to start pricing in these externalized costs. This needs to be priced in. Okay, so go ahead, you're gonna watch the clip, note down answers to the questions, take some notes, and then that'll do it for our talk on exchange. So since the clip is the last thing we'll do for the lecture, I just want to say a couple things before I let you go. Again, be sure to watch the clip right after this. And then Wednesday, for the rest of this week, I'll be posting material on a new topic we're going to be starting, which is kinship and exchange. And so this week we'll dive into kinship. And I'm sorry, not kinship and exchange, kinship and marriage. We'll dive into kinship this week, and that'll set us up to talk about these really interesting marriage patterns cross-culturally next week. So with that, please watch Story of Stuff, take some notes. I think you'll really like it, so enjoy it. It's about 20 minutes. And then I will let you know when material is up tomorrow. Please contact me if you have any questions about anything. I miss you guys. I hope you're doing well. And hey, we just made it through our first online lecture. So, all right. Take care.